Hello, listeners. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Cory Geffre, who is a healthcare executive, author, and speaker with 3 decades of experience turning around hospitals and growing leaders. He currently serves as Executive Vice President of Hospital Operations and Chief Nursing Officer, and is the author of Lead Your People, a framework for leadership success. In our conversation, Cory shares how to leave your ego at the door, tap frontline wisdom, and set crystal clear expectations, what he calls his 3 levels of optimism. So if you're an executive or aspiring leader, this one's for you. And I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. What does it truly mean to be a leader? Welcome to The Executive, a podcast that highlights the career journeys, struggles, successes, and day-to-day experiences of leaders. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Ritter, bringing over 10 years of experience as a leadership and career coach, L&D consultant, and healthcare executive. My mission is to guide leaders towards creating a career they can love. Thank you for listening. Now let's hear from the executive. Cory, so great to meet, and I know you get brought in to turn the ship around when it comes to making hospitals thrive, which is so critical because of the impact they have on patients, but also the communities. Uh, Really curious, like when you jump in on that first day and your leadership table, like what are you really trying to look for?
Yeah, I would say that I work so hard to not come to the table with an agenda. You've got things that you've always done that have always worked, but I really like to just come in there and just say, what sort of things can I see? And that probably has about 25% of the value, 75% of the value is the information that I get from those closest to the work. I will spend as little time as I can asking leaders and executives about what they think needs to change, and mainly frontline staff, and then helping translate that to the executive leaders. Many of the ideas, and I would maybe even argue most of the ideas that get implemented in a turnaround, come from the frontline staff. And they might not be fully developed or ripe or ready, and they might have a selfish spin to them. But once you can kind of untangle that and get through that kind of ball of yarn, you start to realize that there are real opportunities within an organization to use the people closest to the work to come up with those ideas to turn around. So I start there, Ben, just those who are closest to the care in this case for hospitals.
Interesting to hear you say that because you would think like if a hospital's not doing good, then maybe they're not billing correctly. Like if I go straight to finances, and you went straight to people.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm curious, like what are some of the things that I mean, just out of curiosity, like what are some of those things that people share with you that end up becoming really critical to turning around a hospital?
Yeah, there's so much work that people do that used to have value and no longer does. I kind of liken this to how we continue to layer on laws in our United States, but we don't get rid of old ones that no longer apply. Like most people don't have horses or ride them down the street, but we still have some laws that refer to that. So, same thing with the work that people are doing at the hospital. There's a lot of this work that used to have value. A great example that I like to use is what my very first organization. I was executive leader. We had a nurse with 30 years of experience, and every day she spent 5 hours of her day researching one particular type of patient, those that had congestive heart failure. And she was auditing to be sure that our charts were complete so we could maximize billing. So I asked a really simple question: how well do we do with this? And she said, "Oh, we're 100%." Like, "How long have we been 100%?" "We haven't had a fallout in 5 years." She spends 5 hours a day doing something where there's been 0 variation in 5 years because no one said, "Please stop doing that and start spending that 5 hours doing something that's more valuable." That sort of waste exists, I know, not just in healthcare, but in many organizations, and we have to go and look at work that no longer matters. And sometimes the frontline staff don't know that it no longer matters. They were trained on it, they were told, and no one does the evaluation process to remove that unnecessary work.
And sometimes I work with executives and they're kind of early on in their career, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to be in the details. I want to
Mm,
just to be above it all. I'm the strategy. I'm the idea guy." I'm like, but have you been in the details yet? Like,
mhm.
are you sure that the things are working in the way that you think they're working? And I think that's such a big gap that leaders say, "Well, this is my job. I'm not a micromanager, right? I trust my people, but to trust your people, you have to know what your people are kind of doing first, or you have to know at least what's happening within the organization." It sounds like you're going in and, looking underneath the rug.
Yeah, this I'm a huge fan of Abraham Lincoln, and if you've watched the movie or read anything about him, you'll know that as the president of the United States in one of the most challenging time in our organizations in our nation's history, he would go and meet with the frontline troops, and he would get what he referred to as his public opinion bath. People would share with him all the things they thought he was doing wrong and the shortcomings, but he left his ego in his office and came out and just asked questions and took all of that feedback. And man, that just really spoke with me, resonated with me that I need to leave my ego in the office, that I'm not here to react or maybe even fix, that sometimes I just need to listen. And through that listening process, you will get all those things. So I think that you can, as an executive, get sucked down in the weeds too much. Your job is to be like a crop duster, so to speak. They have to maintain elevation to keep that lift, but sometimes they have to get right down on top of the crops to be sure that spray goes the right place. And I think you have to go both up and down as a leader. It's not all 50,000 foot, it's not all 10,000 foot, and it's not all boots on the ground. It is actually the combination of all of those that I think is a secret sauce for leadership, or at least has worked really well in my journey.
Mm. This idea of like leaving your ego in the office. Can you just expand on that a little bit more, and like what that means in terms of your leadership style?
Yeah, it's in my leadership style has really evolved. I was not good at leaving my ego in the office. I would go out to defend or react. That was the two kind of modes that I would have when I was out and about. And I realized that you stop getting critical information when you defend and react. And even if you have a great defense, it might not be relevant. There might be too many details to it that people don't understand. And so if I leave my reaction and my defensiveness in the office, which is really my ego, it's about me, and I just start saying, I want to meet people where they are, not where I am. I have a lot more information than they do about the global strategy organization, but they have a lot more information than I do about the day-to-day operations. And if I want to make operations better, it has to be all about them and as little as possible about me. And so I think that leaders that can learn how to do that, first step is recognizing that if you're a leader, you have an ego. And if when people say like, no, no, I don't have an ego, well, you haven't met your ego yet. That's why you don't think you have one, but we have one. That's kind of one of the pieces that helps people be successful. You just have to recognize it, know what it looks like, know what it sounds like when it's talking to people, and leave it off the table as much as you possibly can.
Hmm. Yeah, it's not about me, it's about we. I mean, that's a little trite, but I
Hmm.
think it still works. I mean, even looking at the title of your book, Lead Your People, it's not lead yourself or promote
Hmm.
yourself. It's about your team. You can't lead without followers. Um, so looking at your background, you transitioned into an executive level role. I'm just curious because oftentimes when it comes to at least like clinicians, moving into administration is like a big decision. Can you like take me back into your career history in terms of kind of like how that even happened?
Yeah, I really had a non-traditional trajectory, which may inspire someone who's listening to this. I was a frontline nurse for several years. I was someone who was really good at offering public opinion baths to leaders at that time about the inefficiencies that existed and things that we could do better. And through growth of my kind of entrepreneurial spirit outside of healthcare, I started businesses, had several businesses, had employees, got to really realize that some of the things that I wanted as a frontline staff couldn't be true. So I would spend some of my day as a owner, entrepreneur, AKA boss, and I would spend some of my days as a frontline staff. and the blending of those 2 gave a unique experience, and then I was reached out to by a CEO who said, "Hey, I've heard about these leadership talks that you give. I've heard about these leadership lessons that you give. Do you wanna be somebody who just teaches, or do you wanna be somebody that does?" And he knew how to kinda light a little fire in me because I didn't wanna be just someone who only taught and didn't do, and so he talked me into coming and running what he referred to as one of the biggest disasters of departments that he'd seen in his entire career. And, when you're a fixer or a problem solver, or you love those sorts of things like I do, that was music to my ears. It took him a couple of times to convince me, but I came into a unit where my first couple of weeks there, nearly every staff member issued their resignation. And so we were in real tricky waters. And I asked them all to give me 6 weeks to turn the department around. If we weren't successful, then I would accept the resignation, no more questions asked. And one of my, kind of foundational stories is that when I left the organization several years later, all of those nurses were still in that department. And so we were able to get things back together. And so I was a manager for a few months, fixed this department. I got handed another department where several of the staff had just left. We had a physician who just left, and we may had to actually shutter that service. And so I put 2 of those back together, in a short order, and went from manager to director to VP in about 12 and a half months, and then as a vice president, I learned that it was way different than being a manager or director, that there were new skill sets that I had to learn, and, that's kind of my rapid trajectory into that, and then as a VP, of course, you just continue to learn every day, but a little bit of a non-traditional path. I think there's some piece of this that would be important for people, to have experience outside of just one thing. You look at there's Nick Saban and many of these great college coaches who say, "Hey, we really want multi-sport athletes. We don't want one sport uh, players. We just don't know their dimension. We don't know all these other things." And I think there's value in that. So if someone has a hobby that doesn't align with what they do at work, that may be okay. It might be providing you experience that will be valuable that you can use or just tweak from outside industries. So I always encourage people to be Renaissance personas, to do multiple different things, to try to grow their talents in different directions.
Yeah, from what you shared, you were putting yourself out there, sharing information that mattered to you, that you thought was important. And those sparks, right, ended up like finding one guy who was like, "Hey, you need to come here." And when we think about like our career trajectories, a lot of those opportunities come because we shined our light on the right person. And that person was like, "Oh, I want that person here." And like you've kind of built your career, it sounds like, by leaning into things that interested you the most. Um, but you kept graduating in terms of leadership. So
Mhm.
personally, I guess what attracted you about those opportunities, and what made that decision to move into a more, I guess, more responsibility, higher level leadership, which can sometimes be intimidating to some people.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that I kept challenging myself. I think that the adage of kind of keeping your powder dry or keeping your knife sharp, whatever you want to do, that I wanted to continue to have different experiences in different areas, in different departments with different spans of control. And even in my vice president career, over the last 10 years, I've been in 3 separate organizations as a VP, each one twice the size of the one before, which means twice the challenges, twice the problems, twice the everything else. And I've just really enjoyed that to keep my mind sharp. I get uncomfortable. And whenever I start thinking, like, maybe I'm bored and not challenged. And I know for some people that comes with a whole lot of guilt. Like, this can't be about me and I don't want to be selfish, but for me, it's really about keeping myself engaged and challenged. I am not ready to be in a maintenance part of my career. I'm not sure that I will ever want to be there, but it's just like, this has worked here and this continues to work and I want to try something new. So I just love to continue and challenge myself. And again, in the early part of this conversation, we were talking about, it not being about you. But the same point, you do have to do things to keep yourself fully engaged, fully fulfilled, fully excited. And sometimes that means stepping out, taking a risk, being prepared to fail and fall, but really being sure that your fire in your belly is still burning strong every day when you get up to do what you have to do.
Yeah, well, so how do you do that? How
um,
how do you stay engaged and interested in your work? And not just you, so start with you, and then I kind of want
yeah.
to broaden this and talk a little bit about medical professionals.
Yeah, for myself, I have this is probably the 25-year-old version of myself is like, "Hey, I've got this all figured out. Like, I'm good. I know what I need to know." And, around age 40, I realized, like, "Wait a minute. What if I'm nowhere near the best version of myself? What if I'm only 10% as good as I could be, or 25 or 50, or maybe it's even the 75%? Shouldn't I try to become the best version of myself? If I've been given a set of talents and opportunities, don't I owe it to just try to maximize those?" And so that for me, it is really it. It's just like I'm just gonna wanna continue to push and challenge, and that excites me to continue to pursue the best version of myself, and so far, every year, I find a slightly better version. I don't wish for a past version. There are pieces from the past maybe that you wish you could take forward, but just globally, I'm like, "I really like this journey I'm on. I wanna keep that trajectory." And that's also something that I translate to the people that I lead to say, what if you're nowhere near as good as you could be? What if you're nowhere near your maximum potential? Maybe you're there, but how do you know? If we don't continue to challenge and push and live just a little bit uncomfortable with the things that we're doing every day, with the decisions that we have to make, with the strategies that we have to deploy. So for me, it really is, feeling an obligation to take full advantage of the opportunities that are available.
Mhm. It sounds very reflective. Like, where am I? How am I feeling? Where am I going? What's my potential? Do you have any sort of process? Or I guess when you even just reflecting on your own steps, is there anything that we can share with the audience that might help them kind of conduct that same analysis?
Yes, and it's a journey, Ben. I'm sure you're familiar with this. At some point in your life, you just have to go through this journey of, kind of deep self-reflection to, and I call it painful levels of self-awareness. And then the best leaders to me have painful levels of self-awareness. And we talk about self-awareness like, oh, I'm good at this and I can do this and I can do. I'm talking about painful levels of self-awareness to say, hey, these childhood issues that you had with your parents or with your friends or with family member, they rear their ugly head in different forms and fashions in your adult life. So, do you recognize when that happens? Do you recognize when you have an emotion, a feeling, or reaction that's related to something that's your own? So, painful levels of self awareness mean most of your shortcomings, most of your failures, and this is you just being a completely authentic version of yourself. So I think that self-reflection journey, whenever I respond to something and I'm like, ugh, I don't really like how I responded to that. Why did I respond that way? Where did that come from? And it really is kind of harsh self-analysis, but from a spirit of wanting to become better, not trying to tear myself down. And I think sometimes people can start to go down this spiral where they're like, I'm not a good person. I don't deserve these sorts of things. And I go down the path of saying, hey, I need to be better than that. How can I overcome that? So just the lens of being better as opposed to tearing down. And I think just picking the opportunities as they present themselves. When you see something that rears itself in you that you don't like, you should pick on that scab a little bit to find out what's underneath.
Mm. The like full frontal view of self. Like, this is how I've been. This is who I am. This is who I want to be. Where's the gap? Let's analyze and reflect for that. I mean, as an executive leader, I can't tell you how many times I met with CEOs and they demand a performance management process throughout the organization, but they don't have one-on-ones with their team.
Mm,
And like, they don't create the opportunity for reflection. So, for a leader, you can do that for others, but we need to do that for ourselves. So, are you being the best leader for you? Are you setting yourself up to meet with yourself every quarter, every month, or maybe even you do a 6 month or annual reflection to what you're saying, all the scabs, pick at them, take a look at them, dive into them, and see what you can learn. I also was curious about teams. So when
Mhm,
you jump into a health system, you know, working to save people's lives or to care for others is different than kind of going in and working on some spreadsheets. So
mhm.
how are you creating that engagement or motivation, which you think would be kind of just given in such a meaningful job, but isn't at all times?
Yeah, healthcare is interesting because it really is a melting pot. Peter Drucker once said that it's one of the most difficult industries to lead in. And other people have said it's the only place where you have multimillionaires rubbing shoulders and working side by side with minimum wage workers. And in most other industries, there's some separation of walls or offices or buildings or locations from that, but that doesn't happen in healthcare. The surgeon, doing open heart surgery, making $1 million is right beside somebody who is entry level. So it's really, really a melting pot. So people have different motivations. You have really, really talented people in healthcare, and they might be physicians, they might be nurses, they might have different technical jobs where they've always been the best. You think about this in pro sports, somebody who's always been the best, that comes with its own set of ego challenges. And then you put them in an environment with people who maybe are struggling with their own self confidence and self worth, and you put those beside each other, you can have some real radical team dynamics that have to be corrected. So I really start off with crystal clear expectations. Whenever I hear someone who reports to me say something, and I'll say, "Hey, do you have any questions about what needs to be done?" And when they say, "No, it's crystal clear," I know as a leader I've accomplished my job. And so setting crystal clear expectations, these are accountability, behavior, performance. I sit down with anybody who directly reports to me on day one. I actually have a 3-page document that I provide anybody who reports to me that are things that other people have said who have reported to me, and ugly things from 360s. Like, hey, when he says 2 weeks, he means 2 days. He doesn't have a very clear perspective on how fast things need to move. Moves way too fast. I share that with all of them. Like, these aren't my words. This isn't, been edited. These are things that people have said about me from 360s. I would love to sit down and go through any of them that you want clarification. There are some of them that I wish I could tell you aren't true, but I believe that most of those are true. They're at least how someone felt at some point, and I just want you to see that. And it's really interesting and how quickly, by just sharing your psychological profile with people who report to you, how quickly you develop great rapport because they do know that, this isn't about ego. This isn't about you. This isn't about you just performance managing them, that you really want to work on the partnership. And then I ask them to present me at our next meeting with 8 to 10 things that they would like me to know about them, some good, some okay, others that maybe what I refer to as dark side of the moon things of ourselves. And I really think that you can really gain one-on-one rapport, and then you bring that to a larger group and you start sharing with the larger group about things you do well, things that you're really struggling with, and it's just so awesome to see team dynamics change when everybody has to kind of, reveal portions of themselves that they try to hide. Their shortcomings become, out in the open, and it really changes how people feel about each other.
I'm accepted no matter what. Like the
Mm,
level of safety that could be created through transparency and authenticity is unreal. Sadly, in the work environment, people are often working in fear, and,
mhm.
they're going to lose their job, or I'm not going to be able to put food on the table, or what are they going to think of me? And to be able to break that down through, no, this is me. This is what I've received. I'm human. This is what I'm working on. This is what people have said in the past. These are some of the mistakes, and I want to learn about you. And to put that on the table, um, like, yeah, incredible. I can only imagine the impact that would have.
And there's one other piece to share. in that 3-page document, it also says, "When I don't like your performance, here are the exact words that I'll use."
Mm,
And I've been very meticulous about using those, and I kinda call them the 3 levels of optimism. The first conversation is, "I don't really like this, but I'm very optimistic we can make changes that we need to make it turn around." The second one is, "We haven't made any changes. We already talked about this. I'm cautiously optimistic that we can turn this around." And the third conversation is, "We've talked about this multiple times. I am no longer optimistic that you're gonna make the changes, yet you have an opportunity to change my mind by taking radical action quickly." Those are the 3 conversations, so people know when they hear the words me say, "I'm optimistic, I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm no longer optimistic." They know what that path is headed, and
mm.
unfortunately, in my career, I have had to let some people go, and the first couple of times I let people go, they were shocked, and that's on me. That's 100% on the leader if someone's shocked that you're letting them go. The last 2 that I've had to do, when I came in for that conversation, they handed me the resignation letter because we had already had these 3 levels of optimism, conversation.
They knew. Yeah, you mentioned crystal clear expectations.
Mhm.
It actually, when I don't know if you know this about me, but I worked in healthcare. It's the first
Mm.
part, kind of first career, well, second career, because third career. First career was soccer, or tried to be. Second career was health policy. Third career was healthcare, hospital system.
Wow.
And I started out working in quality improvement, the department where clinicians went to retire. And I was not a clinician. And it was incredible because I was this young buck who just started his career that was attending conferences to learn best practices in clinical care and
Mhm.
patient experience and everything, and also increasing the bottom line through value-based care, reducing readmissions, falls, hospital-acquired infections, all that fun stuff. I was learning this and having to go train
Mm.
everyone in the hospital on it. And it was the first time I came across the concept of teach back because we're working on just nurse education, patient education. And I was like, oh, yeah, if you want someone to verify they've learned something, they should tell you that like they should explain it to you. I was like, oh, what a simple concept, but how impactful uh, to set expectations and then have them share what those expectations are and to say, okay, great, great, we're crystal clear. We know what we both need from each other. Because then when they don't meet that, easy conversation. Hey, look, we didn't meet that.
Super easy. Yep.
It's it's funny. It's so many concepts are easy if we can get rid of the fear and we can get rid of the discomfort that comes from having those tough conversations and being open and transparent as you've been sharing and also leaving our ego at the door
We didn't talk
or
about
in the office.
soccer. We didn't talk about soccer. I love to hear that. I coached 50 youth soccer teams. That may be the number 1 place that I've gathered, tactics from for how I lead people, is that just
Hmm.
a large scale behavior, project when you just have people from multiple different situations, backgrounds, talents, and skill sets, and you just dump them on a field and you try for 45 minutes to get them to think less about themselves and more about the team. That's healthcare, and even the bumblebee phase early on when the U6 soccer, man, so we should have a whole conversation about soccer sometime.
Well, I'd love to hear some of those leadership ideas and concepts that come from coaching. What
Mm.
you got one golden nugget for us at least?
I do. This one's a little controversial, so you should buckle your seatbelt here. Um, being a chief nursing officer, 99% of the people that report to me are women. And women and men aren't the same in the workforce. They're not the same outside of the workforce, and they're definitely not the same on the soccer field. And when I coached those teams, I had to coach them differently. So here's my super simple difference. And again, not meant to offend, but meant to maybe bring a smile to some people's face, is generally boys will win at all cost. Girls will sometimes lose to teach their coach a lesson. and there's just different complexities there. And really the summation is generally, the boy players are about themselves. The girl players, in this case, youth soccer, really wanted to be sure that the coach had their back and was doing it for honorable reasons to make them better. And I had a team that I pushed too hard as a soccer team, and they quit on me. And it wasn't them, it was me. I just pushed them too hard.
Hmm.
And it was early on that I started to learn some of these, gentle persuasion and having them focus on each other and not on me and not on their parents screaming from the sidelines. And when I could get them to lock in on each other, we were able to do great things. I but those 50 teams that I coached, probably 45 of them, I think were girls. I have 2 girls and 1 boy. I started coaching a little bit later. My boy was the oldest, and so I learned a lot from that, and those apply, and maybe they're less about boys and girls, and maybe it's about human nature, but for me, I just really learned a lot from those youth sports team, particularly the girls' teams that I coached.
And that's why women should rule the world,
They
because
yes, absolutely, I
yeah, because
agree.
they want to work together. And
Yep,
I know we're making some generalities, but I think it's a positive one where
yep.
you can leading with people instead of against people, or using people is hopefully what leadership is more of. I got asked earlier today, like, what are some qualities of the best leader? And I go, well, there's a lot of different types of organizations out there that are toxic and have different styles of leadership that are very successful for them hitting their goals.
Mhm.
Now, do I think it's the best type of leadership? No. but but I think it's hard to qualify. If you could talk to an executive leader right now that is curious in just getting 1% better tomorrow,
Mm.
what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say that, we've talked so much about this today, and I just wanna stick with it is, think about future version of yourself, and what I don't mean you in 20 years from now, I mean your replacement, however long you have left, the next person that comes along. What sort of obstacles can you remove today that would benefit them, not you? They might be really hard to move. What sort of leadership bench do you need to build for them so they have multiple different levels of talent and skills to choose from when they need to make a promotion? Don't just develop one person, your succession plan, who's a carbon copy of you. The next version of you might bring different talents and skill sets to the table. Therefore, you should give them a whole selection of leaders that have different strengths and weaknesses and let them choose the one that would fill the gaps the best or meet the organization's need. And so, once again, we've talked about just removing yourself from the equation. If you do what needs to be done for somebody other than yourself, for some people, it's actually the motivation that they need. I don't want to have that tough conversation, but because I don't want somebody in 20 years to have it because I didn't have it today, here we go. That would be my advice. And it's probably even more simply put, just don't delay.
Mm. Well, if our listeners want more advice and they want to listen to you or follow you or learn from you, where can they go?
LinkedIn is the best place for me. That's where I occasionally will just share my thoughts. My thoughts are generally about leadership or operations. So LinkedIn is a great place to find me there. I do have a website that's my first name, last name, CoryGeffre.com, where they could, see some of the other things that I do there. Of course, they could pick up a copy of the book, Lead Your People, on Amazon is the best place to get that. But I also just love making connections. People just, will message me questions about their scenario, and answering a perfect stranger's question in the middle of a chaotic day is really enjoyable for me. It allows me to just kind of refocus my energy, and I don't get to all of them every day, but I will eventually get to them. And so, multiple different ways for people to connect. And I just want to thank you for inviting me on today. This has been a blast, Ben.
What a example of a mission-driven healthcare leader.
Mm.
Someone that's like, yeah, reach out to me. I want to add some value. Come talk. So thank you for doing what you do and being who you are and helping leaders lead. And creating the impact that you are. So thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Executive Podcast, where we explore what it truly means to be a leader. If you've taken one thing away, make sure to subscribe, share, and most importantly, leave a review. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.